Good. Hello. Good morning, Rajesh. This is Tom Barnhart, and we are on for our weekly series of GBS interviews with those running GBS centers around Central Europe or Europe. And you are running BMI's operations, GBS operations, which has an office in Vilnius, big center there. Thanks for taking a few minutes this morning. We're going to try to keep it about 10 minutes or so. But first of all, Rajesh, if you give us a bit of quick background about yourself and how you came into this role.
No, thank you, Tom. Really, really great to be part of this conversation. So I lead GBS and the GPO team here at BMI. And so my kind of career journey, so I started as an accountant back in India, worked in India for many years. So I've got lots of operational finance experience. Then I worked in Africa for a few years. And then I decided to change my career, focus more on transformation. So I went into management consulting with KPMG, was there for 10 years. Then I moved to the other side, which is the internal back into industry. But then I went into GSK to lead their global transformation function, focusing on operating model, captives, outsourced, process transformation, ERP implementation.
So GSK, you had then some responsibility for overseeing Poland. Then I suppose that's set up of GSK, right?
Yeah. So as part of the whole operating model piece, I set up the Poland Finance Hub in Poznan.
Yep.
So it's now about 2,500 headcount center, quite big.
Yeah.
And then during COVID, I also set up a GCC in Bangalore, again, about 2,000 headcount center, which has just actually completed 5 years of setup. So really, really interesting times at GSK, learned a lot. And then I joined BMI in the summer of 2024. So here I am.
Okay. All right. And tell us about the history of BMI's relatively new operations in Vilnius.
Yeah. Look, just before I go into the Vilnius bit, just a quick background. So BMI as a company, the BM and I are actually 3 brands: Brass, Monnier, Icopal. And BMI has grown through acquisition of these 3 brands. And because we are in the roofing business, the business is very local. So as you can imagine, a house or a flat in Poland is not the same as in Italy. It's not the same as in the UK. Different styles, different preferences of customers. So it's a very local business. So for us as a company, as we've grown through this acquisition, different processes, different systems across, not just in finance, but across. Standardization is a big topic for us. And that nicely leads on to something I'll talk about a little later in this conversation. So we operate across 30 plus countries in Europe, Asia. We don't operate in the Americas as much because we got our group companies under the Standard Industries banner who operate more in North America. So as far as GBS is concerned, we have, let's say, a 2-tier model. We've got our captive center, as you said, in Vilnius. We call it the value center because our ambition is to build Vilnius into more of a value center, similar to a concept of the GCC in India, Global Capability Center in India. And then the second part of that is our outsourced operation in Colombo with a company called WNS. So we're approximately 250 FTs across those two, about 150 in Vilnius, about 100 in Colombo.
Okay.
And it spans across finance, HR, master data management. So Vilnius has P2P, record to report, order to cash. We call it lead to cash, order to cash, master data management. And then we've got smaller teams around FP&A, supply chain finance, risk and controls, and some controllership activities.
How about IT or tech? Is that part of it somewhere?
No. So not so much so initially when we set up Vilnius, we had a vision to make this a bigger GBS center, which covered everything from customer services, IT, marketing, and so on. But I think, let's say we had some starting problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have now focused mainly on finance and HR.
Mm-hmm.
And we still have, let's say, an ambition at some point to come back to those topics. But at the moment, it's mainly finance and HR.
So Rajesh, so you've come in, I suppose if you've got different operating entities and acquisitions, you've got lots of non-standard processes across the organization. Tell us about the challenges you got with kind of putting that all under one roof
Yeah,
excuse the pun, right?
exactly. Thank you. Yeah, good pun. So I'd say the challenges we face, particularly on the finance front, are twofold. So one is around standardization of process, and the other one standardization of the operating model. So what do I mean by that? Let me go to the operating model first. So we are not standardized across actually who does what across the markets, across Vilnius and Colombo. So that's one bit. So
Mm-hmm.
the same activity, maybe in one market we have more scope, in another market we have less scope. And this is a bit historical, how the transitions were done. We did a lift and shift, and we
Mm-hmm.
just probably didn't apply as much rigor around the transitions. This was done in 2022. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
I think we also did one lesson learned from this. We tried to do the S4 implementation, the GBS transitions, all at the same time. And for
Mm-hmm.
me, if there was one lesson learned, is don't do ERP implementation and GBS transition at the same time.
Okay.
But also don't do standardization and transition at the same time. My preference is always do lift and shift, then transform, or transform, then do lift and shift.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the operating model bit. The second bit is standardization of process. We have S4HANA in about 10 countries, and then we have ECC, SAP ECC for all the rest, but we have 6 different versions of ECC.
Wow.
And that creates its own non-standardization around the systems and the processes. But also, even where within S4, we have customized S4 so much for different markets as we did the different implementations. We did not follow the standard template.
Mm-hmm.
So that has created, let's say, a lot of non-standardization. The last bit is I mentioned about BMI growing as through acquisitions so there's also this culture bit, which is not to be underestimated,
Mm-hmm.
which is culturally, there is generally a culture of, oh, we are unique. This market is unique.
We're independent. We're this team here. Yeah. Don't force us too much. We like customization a little bit, right?
Yeah. We are different. Our pricing is different, so we're going to do this differently, or whatever it may be. So.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And you mentioned WNS in Sri Lanka. How was that working? You guys, there's always the tension in the GBS or captive between outsourcing and then someone brings it back in. Where are you guys in that process?
So I think one point linked to the whole operating model is because of the operating model. And look, in terms of scale, we're not that big. And I'm saying this openly because a 250 FT GBS is not very big.
Mm-hmm.
In my experience of having done bigger transitions and bigger GBS before. So what that translates into is a lot of fragmentation in processes. So there's lots of handoffs, and at the moment, to give you to our example around journals, you got different people preparing, different people posting, different people validating, and different people reconciling those accounts. And so there's a lot of toing and froing and communication, unnecessary and wasting of time. So what we are now moving towards, and we've already done that in P2P. So P2P, we moved everything to Colombo. R2R, we're moving the other way. We're moving to Vilnius. And in invoice to cash or order to cash, we've moved everything to Vilnius. So we're moving towards a model where we say there's only one location which does the whole thing rather than having this fragmentation. So hopefully that'll bring more clarity to the operating model. the next stage of this is actually solving for the inconsistencies or RACI between markets and Colombo and markets and Vilnius. So that's the next bit we are working on as we speak.
So those processes are getting sorted out and standardized as much as you can, and centralized, and automation. Tell us about the impact on efficiency and numbers of people required to do X at BMI.
So our goal is ultimately to be, as with any other company at the moment, cost optimization and efficiencies is quite a, let's say, a big challenge for us, and something we're working towards. So for us, as much as some of these changes brings through efficiencies, you're looking at somewhere between, I'd say, 30 to 40% efficiencies that we are aiming to achieve through these changes. It's a mix of labor arbitrage, it's a mix of driving productivity. In some areas, our productivity is quite low. So we're doing lots of initiatives around improving productivity. So as I said, we're about 30 to 40% is our target for 2026.
So I wanted a couple of things before we wrap up. So tell us about any vendors in terms of advisory. So are you doing that process efficiency and productivity gains yourself, or are you bringing in a KPMG or PwC, someone else to help you with that? And the second thing is, we got to talk about AI for a moment. What are you doing in terms of practical AI applications that are really, granular? What are you doing in that space?
Yeah, so we have mainly an internal team made of our GPO team. Some teams we've kind of picked from operations, and I would say one or two external contractors. So that's how we've structured our transformation, and I think that works really well. For me, for this kind of thing, there's an internal expertise and internal knowledge required to drive it, especially through to implementation, because we're beyond the strategy and the thinking bit. We're now into execution. What was your second question?
Well, about AI, how much you're applying AI? Yeah.
So AI, look, for us, in terms of our maturity, we're only about 5 years old as GBS. And as I said, we focused initially on S4 implementation, then fixing some of those. Now we're into standardization. For us, we want to get these basic foundational elements right first before we start to think about AI. Having said that, we do have some point solutions, like we use Zelix as a tool in P2P for duplicate checking, for automated supplier statement reconciliations. We partner with Celonis as well. So we got Celonis as a process mining tool. I've just had a very interesting discussion this week about the AI functionalities of Celonis, which we're going to really look at. So that's a mix of the AI chat API, how it can help to not only insights, but also driving action, but also other aspects of that whole process mining. So for me, I think the next stage for us from an AI perspective is to start looking at what Celonis can do to help.
Okay, great. Well, look, thank you very much, Rajesh. We'll try to keep this relatively short, and it goes longer because it's interesting for me. So thanks for your time today, and appreciate that. We'll check back in with you in a year or two and see what's new, what's changed, and how BMI has changed its operating model, if anything. So look forward to continuing the conversation, and thanks again for the time today.
Thank you, Tom. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Okay, thanks, Rajesh. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.